a number of residents of East Palestine have been offered $1,000 checks to help compensate them for any dislocations going on. Michael O'Shea is a lawyer representing many of those residents, saying don't be so quick to take those checks. He's with Lipson O'Shea, the legal group, and the principal and the owner. Michael, good to have you. Tell us a little bit, or can you tell us a little bit about these checks that Norfolk Southern is offering?
All right, and I apologize at first glance. I'm coming in through my iPad, which I'm going to try to assist you guys on.
That's okay.
You know, we're actually boots on the ground. We're out here right now. But the big concern that we're having, and thank you for getting this out to your listeners, is that the acceptance of this, they're essentially offering two types of fees. One is what we would call a reimbursement fee, which Norfolk and Southern claims they're going to give to people within a 1 mile radius for hotels and other types of necessities immediately after the evacuation. And the second is this thing called a inconvenience fee, a standard $1,000 per person check. We're suggesting to folks that can afford it, and again, we recognize that some cannot, that they don't accept that either of those two fees because it might be argued later as a settlement of any claim that they have, past, present, or future, against the railroad for what they did here. So, and we have a little history here. Back in 2005, they had a railroad accident where they went around offering what I would call dangle money or trickle money to folks, and they took it, and then they later argued that these folks had settled their claims. So we want to get out the word to folks, do not, if you can afford it, again, emphasizing if you can afford it, do not take this, upfront money. But if you do, be aware that these folks might argue later that that this is payment in full. Now, I will tell you that I was on the phone yesterday with a lawyer for Norfolk and Southern, and we have prepared a document that memorialized the press releases that they're sending out to everybody saying this is not payment in full or a compromise of any claims. I said, good. Thank you for calling. Can you sign the agreement that basically ratifies what your public relations folks are saying? And they said they would not. So that got our spidey sense, if I can use that term, even more tingling about what's going on. So that's where we are right now.
All right, but there's nothing written or attached to any of these checks, Michael, that says, all right, if you accept this, any further, even up to litigation, cannot be considered against Norfolk Southern that we know of.
That we know of, although some folks, in order to get their combined, they would combine the checks of the reimbursement and the inconvenience fee into one check. They had to fill out a form, and we'll talk about the W-9 issue in a second, that the client had to sign, So, and I gave the example the other day, if somebody backs into your car and they get out and say, I'm sorry, and they give you $100 cash, you take it, put it in your pocket, then you go back to the repair shop, and the repair shop guy's, it's going to be $800 to fix the car. And you go back to that person that gave you the $100, they're going to say, no, accord and satisfaction. I gave you the $100, you accepted it, you put it in your pocket. You can't come after me for the other, let's say in that example, $700.
Do we know, Michael, whether Norfolk or a representative from Norfolk is going to be in attendance at this meeting tonight with residents?
No idea if they're going to be there. I know that we are going to be down the street doing our own questions and answer presentation with a nationwide law firm called Motley Rice. There it is. Yep, you got the flyer, so that we can answer a lot of folks' questions. We've had a bunch of folks already reach out to us, and we just want to make it clear to them that we're here to help. But, and that reimbursement agreement that I talked about before, we put it on our public website. Anybody can download it, whether they're our clients or not, just to try to protect everybody that might be at risk.
So how many clients right now, Michael, or residents have you lined up who are you are representing in this?
I would say at last count, we're up to somewhere near 35 to 45, but we categorize them as family claims too, because there's some households that have, 5 or 6 people living in them, and some of them are adults, some of our kids. So it's hard to do the tally right now.
So another thing the company has claimed, at least the town has claimed, all the way up to the governor's claim, they've examined and studied the air and the environment right around that 1 mile radius, and that it's fine, that there's no anomalies going on there, nothing dangerous to report yet. Again, that seemed to be restricted right around the 1 mile area in which this first occurred. Now, obviously, that's subject to change, and we learned from 9/11 in downtown New York that it most dramatically changes. But what is your sense of what the officials so far are saying, that this looks worse than it is?
Well, optics can be very deceiving when it comes to toxic, chemicals and stuff like that. Let me tell you this. Years ago, we represented a bunch of poor workers from a plant in Ohio here called GenCorp that produced vinyl chloride. And it has a sweet candy-like smell to it. And if you were smelling it and working with it, nobody, the company knew about it, but the workers sure didn't. It's basically causing your body serious harm, which I will have to emphasize often doesn't, mature the injury for sometimes 10 or 15 years. It has what we call a latency period to it.
Right.
It could last a long time. So there's no way that they can assess the bodily injury factors at this time. There's just no way. And let me tell you this, the second most important category of damages that our clients are experiencing are what we call property loss. I spoke to a poor woman the other day, who's one of our clients, who runs a bed and breakfast up there to serve, bread and butter, if you will. And she's not getting any bookings for the indefinite future, certainly not now. I spoke to a woman who had her house listed for sale before the accident, wanted to get a target price of about $100,000. No one's making her an offer on her house right now. And then I talked to a farmer whose family has farmed a certain area of that East Palestine area for over 100 years. He says, no one's going to buy my crops if they know they come from East Palestine. Think about it. So those people, regardless of the bodily injury manifestations, which we think will pop up in the years to come, one of the more immediate damages to these folks is their livelihood, their ability to live like they were able to live before the accident.
Another thing the company has said, and I don't know the letter of the law here as well as you, Michael, in fact, not even close, but that this wasn't classified as a hazardous material train because only one of the cars was carrying what would be deemed hazardous material. So by the rules of, alerting officials ahead of time of potentially hazardous material in a train coming their way, they were exonerated. I think that's the way they're presenting it. Is that true?
I can tell you this. I would be stunned if Norfolk Southern tries to defend this on what we call liability grounds. I'll bet you they've already decided to throw in the towel for public relations standpoint and say, look, this is our fault. We knocked over the glass enough. We're going to clean it up.
Do you know that's the case, Michael? I'm sorry. Do you know that's the case, that they've essentially said we're moving beyond this $1,000 settlement per person or initial paycheck per person, and we know we're into this in a much bigger way?
Well, we know that they've already notified the government, the state of Ohio, that we'll clean up this mess. Okay. So if they're making that commitment to the state of Ohio, I assume they're making the same commitment to the people, the individuals that are injured.
Because cleaning up that mess is at least tens of millions of dollars, just the mess. I would imagine this goes significantly higher, right?
I don't think they'll have a price tag on cleanup for months, if not years. I mean, it's way too early to put a price tag on it. So what about the people you represent, just as their lawyer? Do you advise them to be out of town, to not attend this meeting tonight, that it's physically risky for them to do so? Well, what's really risky, I think, more than anything else, is people that have wells for water, okay, as opposed to piping. It's one of the issues that's come up. I'm sorry. Let me do this. I know this happens from time to time. My phone's ringing. So we're really worried about that. They're continuing to do what we call air quality monitoring and stuff like that. But these folks, I want you to imagine I was up there last Wednesday, to give you an example. And I was driving through town and I was trying to make my way to a meeting that we were going to have with some of these folks. And like these pictures are showing you, this entire town was quadrant off like a contagion movie where you couldn't get into certain areas of downtown. I drove by all kinds of businesses that were essentially closed down, quiet, no cars in the parking lot. All you saw were guys in fatigues and state trooper uniforms and state deputy sheriff uniforms all around, blocking off traffic and not letting anybody in. That's how scared they were about what the proximity factor was here.
So finally, I just want to get a handle on this. Who gave the green light for everyone to go back after the explosion and after the deliberate burn and all of that? Was it Norfolk? And did Norfolk then tell local officials, maybe all the way up to the governor's office, for all I know, maybe the transportation department, the federal transportation department, that this was okay for residents to go back? Who has to check something like that off, Michael?
I believe it's either the federal EPA or the Ohio EPA. But
okay.
Look at those folks do great work, but I think there's tremendous pressure brought upon them to give an all clear that may be a way too early all clear.
So it would be unusual to take it just on the advice of the perpetrator of this accident, not that this was something deliberate, but this was a Norfolk train that went off the rails physically and figuratively. Why would they take that advice just from the company behind it?
I would never take the advice from Norfolk and Southern on anything right now. I'm sorry if I'm answering too generically.
No, you're not. All right, Michael, I know you're busy and that phone's ringing, but thank you very, very much. Michael O'Shea, representing a lot of the folks affected by this. By the way, quick peek at Norfolk Southern stock. At its worst after the accident, this had tumbled more than 6%, rebounding a little bit today. At our lows, we were down an additional 3% this morning, coming back a little bit here, but I stress a little bit. But a lot of this might be built on transportation stocks in general, responding well to a strong retail sales report. There is a thinking that people are still buying stuff. Then there's demand for the stuff that trains carry, and they don't all carry hazardous materials, but that could explain how Norfolk is sort of holding up through this, at least since the beginning and the first news of the accident.